Good day, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another guide. This time, this is a promoted guide given to us by Zephyr, who was kind enough to support us on our Twitch channel. Please check out my Twitch channel, linked in the description, should you wish to come and join us and suggest future guides. Anyway, this guide is on Zephyr, the floaty burb frame that has had a lot of unnecessary lack of love because she's a little bit underwhelming, but she's a lot of fun, and she does actually pose a fair bit of damage and a fair bit of crowd control should you give them the right option. Now, Zephyr as a whole has a passive which is quite fun. Zephyr's passive is basically the ability to glide like an elegant eagle and last longer, and essentially it's 0G. Your descent lasts longer, your aim glide lasts longer, and you got a bit more bounciness to yourself. Hence the bird. Kind of fits, really. Then we're going to go into the defaults of Zephyr. So Zephyr is attained from the clan Dojo in the Tenno Labs. Her default form has 450 health, 450 shield, 15 armor, 150 energy, and 1.15 movement speed. The Prime version will be obtained from relics, which are, as of this video, still obtainable in the global drop chance. There'll be a link up in the top right there somewhere, or somewhere on the screen, as to where you can get them from. Bear in mind, they are subject to change, and if they do go into the vault, they will no longer be obtainable from those. So then you might just need to get lucky and find someone who actually has them. But the Prime version is very similar in stats. She has 450 health, 450 shields, 75 armor instead, and 225 energy. So a nice little improvement of armor and energy there. So let's think about Zephyr as a whole. You probably haven't seen much of her, but we're going to take a look and see what she can do. Her first ability is Tailwind. Tailwind is a very fascinating ability that allows you to fling yourself in the trajectory of which you aim. The speed and distance you are able to travel is based on your duration, and it also is able to deal a bit of damage, which I'll show you in a moment. So, what you can do is, if you hold down the ability, it'll charge up and then allow you to fling yourself into the air. And if you then aim glide, it'll then hold yourself in the air, so long as you're aim gliding, which can be quite useful for cheesing certain ribbons that ask you to use aim glide. Now, this also entails the distance you travel. This is also then begged by duration as well, but the main thing this is used for is flinging yourself all over the place, which allows you to act like a majestic eagle allows you to act like a majestic eagle to burst through the air. However, something to keep in mind is that the momentum that you travel at is held even if you land or land against a wall. So there can be some occasions where control of your frame might become a bit hard if you build for full duration. Sometimes lesser duration can be nice for this, but we're going to look into builds later. What will happen as well is if you are facing down directly, you will land and deal 500 damage to a 6-yard radius. And the actual radius of that is then affected by a small amount of your range, although this wouldn't really affect it in the grand scheme of things. It's not really meant for damage. It does cause a stagger as well, which is quite nice. And second of all, we have Air Burst. Now, Air Burst is a funky little ability that fires 3 projectiles out in front of you, which causes the enemy to ragdoll and get knocked back. It deals initially 500 damage and is scaled based on power strength, and the explosion of the where the air burst once it hit target is also based a little bit on range, so you can create a slightly bigger knockback with some extra range. There are some augments for these abilities, which we will go over towards the end of this video. This ability in itself is quite fun, and it allows you to keep a bit of control over an area, and it also works in conjunction with your 4. However, I will explain that when we get to that ability. It's a nice little thing that allows you to be a little bit of a dickbag towards anything that might be in your way, so if we knock things off the edge like that. So, the third ability, Turbulence. Turbulence is a self-cast buff that causes a gust of turbulence to erupt around yourself as a shield. The actual radius of this turbulence is based on your range, and the length of it is based on your duration. This acts as pretty much invulnerability. Anything that is hit scan or a projectile will then subsequently flutter around your body and then be flung off in multiple directions around you, which can in theory hit enemies in your general vicinity. This is pretty much immunity, and is severely underrated. However, things that are AoE and explosive based, the actual projectile of the explosion will still fling around you, so things like bombards, the actual rocket will still fling around you, but if it explodes next to you, it'll still deal damage. This in turn gives Zephyr some insane amount of survivability, and is severely underrated in my eyes as a frame, and can be extremely beneficial. It's pretty straightforward though. The more duration you get, the longer it lasts, the less likely you are to die. I mean, there's a bunch of 155 heavy gunners here that are having no fun with me at the moment, so, you know, it's pretty goddamn strong. Not much to say about it, so we'll sort of move on from here. I think we kind of have to now. And last but not least, we have Zephyr's ultimate, which is Tornado. Now, I'm not sure if the name gives it away or anything, but Tornado summons a tornado. In fact, not just one tornado, but 4 tornadoes. Now, these tornadoes are not so much heavy on the damage initially, but can subsequently become quite powerful. So what you do is you cast them, and they start lifting people up like Dorothy being sent away to the Wizard of Oz. Oh, the Land of Oz, sorry. So there they go, off in the way. It doesn't do too much damage initially, but what you can do is this interacts with your 2, much like I mentioned earlier. So you throw your 2 at them, and the tornado then gets bigger, which in turn will then make it much easier for picking up the enemy. Now, these tornadoes can be controlled by aiming at a location. When you aim at a location, nearby tornadoes will be guided towards the general vicinity of that area, allowing you to control what you pick up. It's a little bit haphazard, and it's not the best crowd control on the planet, but it does have a couple of other extra little gimmicks to it as well, which are quite nice. For example, if you shoot a tornado that has an enemy in its grasp, the damage of what you do to that tornado will then be reflected to the enemy around you. Okay, we're actually going to need to summon some more dudes here because all these guys have now fallen off the edge of the map because that's something they did apparently. So we're going to summon a bunch more dudes and we're going to put this into a bit of practice here. So we're going to summon them here. We're going to have them closer, we're going to make them bigger, and then we're going to start shooting them whilst they're in there. Bear in mind, if you use the 2 whilst they're in the tornado, they'll be flung away because of the explosion. But if you deal some base damage or some explosive kind of damage, so for example, if you're using a status weapon like the Pox or Maradetron or Penta, for example, explosive damage and damage that deals status is going to be incredibly powerful here, because what will then happen is whatever type of damage you deal to the tornado then turns into that damage type. So for example, if you use corrosive damage on the tornadoes then become corrosive, which can really help groups, especially if you're trying to tear away armor. These tornadoes should not be underestimated. They can be insanely powerful. So now that we've taken a look at these, and a little side note with these as well is that the damage they do is based on power strength, but it's not something that's going to make a massive difference to the overall damage, as the damage itself is going to come from how you interact with the tornadoes with your weapons. Melee weapons are not recommended just because you have to be close, and that's going to be a bit unnecessary. Finding the weapon synergy here that works is incredibly potent. My recommendation, Pox, Maradetron, anything explosive. Gucci. Phantasma is also very good as well. So, we're now going to take a look at the augments and how they affect her. Right, so the first augment we're going to look at is Funnel Clouds. And I want to give you an example as to what this does. Funnel Clouds will turn your 4 bigger tornadoes into 8 smaller tornadoes. These tornadoes are going to be much smaller, they're going to be much quicker. They will no longer pick up enemies, however, but when you are on a lower level mission, or you're dealing against, even against higher level enemies, this is going to be quite interesting, as it will allow you to spread your damage a little bit more equally. And rather than flinging enemies all over the place, can be a lot more beneficial for spreading status. So just case in point, we're going to summon them, it's going to bring them all together, and then if we had an explosive weapon, it would be much more beneficial, but you get the idea with this. You can then use the 2, and fling them all over the place. The size of them will still grow larger when you use your 2 on them. However, the actual potency here is with the extra ones, having that damage being flung between them is extremely powerful. So, if we, for example, we try this again over here, let's see the sort of damage we can pull off with the good old Tiburon here. So you can see the damage is spreading very, very, very powerfully here. These guys are level 155, and they are getting shredded by the damage being shared between them. If this was an explosive weapon, they would last maybe half the time. And again, they are still controllable through the directional command of using your aim, and it can be recast on the go as well. They are not as easily controllable. However, the actual control of them, because the way this works, it always goes. The control of the tornadoes goes by whichever of the closest are the ones that will be easier controlled, and then as you can see, these ones are going in the little direction now. It's a little harder to control, but still very potent. And I would recommend for lower level content, or if you're trying to really exploit the status procs that you can get through the tornadoes, this is going to be much more beneficial. Whereas the other one I would say is much more beneficial for maybe slightly lower level content without the augment, or if you're doing maybe infested missions, for example, or a defense mission. That's that augment. I'd say it's probably one of the most useful augments out of all of them, but the others are not anything to sniff at either. Right, and now for Jetstream, a turbulence augment that increases Turbulence's movement speed by 40% and projectile speed by 100%. Now, this is more of a utility augment. If you're in a group and you know that you're going to be close to your allies, this augment is very nice. Duration and range affect the longevity and the effectivity of this mod. However, it is sort of a use if you want to in place of a survivability mod or maybe a utility mod. So for example, if I was using Constitution, I might use this instead, just to be a bit more beneficial to your allies. People often misconstrue Zephyr as not having much group utility. This gives her a lot more relevancy to a group setup and can be very beneficial for higher level content. Secondly, we're then going to look at target fixation. Target fixation at max rank will give you 50% damage with your tailwind. So essentially the way this works is each enemy hit increases tailwind's damage by 50% and resets once your feet touch the ground. So for every target you travel through, the damage at the end will subsequently get higher. So this is a really technical augment, but it has the potency of being very powerful. So what you would do with this is you would travel through targets, you would keep dipping backwards and forwards until you've hit as many targets as possible. If you do touch the ground, it resets, so you've got to have a bit of finesse with it, but you'll then shoot yourself in the sky and then drop yourself down and do the AoE burst that you do when you aim directly down with your tailwind. It's not something I would personally use, but it can be a bit of fun, I guess. Something to see some big numbers. Alright, and now we are going to take a look at the generic builds of Zephyr. Most of these builds will take up to 2 Former. I do also have a 0 Former build as well, which is quite good for lower level play until you can get the corrupted mods or the drift mods from Lua. The first thing we're going to look at is a Jetstream build, which focuses more on the ability of dipping, ducking, dodging, and diving, and using your buff to help your team. This build sort of focuses a bit more on the duration side of it to allow your buff to last longer, your Jetstream to last longer, and your your Turbulence to last longer, and your Tornadoes to be up for longer as well. This is also one that you would probably use for more open areas, as it's going to allow your Tailwind to fling you much further. This is something that would work well Plains of Eidolon, or maybe very open survival/defense maps. The thing with Zephyr's builds is that they're all very playful. Zephyr's abilities on their own have more than enough utility in terms of range and potency to be quite good as they are. The way you build is sort of down to the way you feel would work well for you. So anything that I'm showing you now, feel free to replace anything for what you feel would be comfortable for the way you play, because Zephyr is very much a play style based frame. In terms of arcanes you use, it's entirely personal preference. She is a tiny bit squishy at times if you don't have your Turbulence up, so Arcane Guardian can be there as a bit of a safeguard. You could use Arcane Precision if you want to try and make use of weapons more. It's, again, personal preference. Now, in terms of a Funnel Clouds build, you're going to go for a little less on the duration side of things and maybe a bit more on efficiency and a bit more power strength. Again, there's not much of a difference between most of her builds. However, I found this works quite well for myself. I would potentially get rid of power strength in place of maybe cutting drift if I wanted them to last a bit, the Funnel Clouds last a bit longer, or if I wanted maybe a bit more range on what I'm doing. This has worked well for me if I'm doing defensive-based missions, and is quite good as well for survivability, just in case, just because you don't have as much duration with this build, your Turbulence, may not be up as long. So this is a little bit more safe, but a little bit more powerful on what you actually do. Then as a generic build, this is sort of just an example as to what you can do and still have a decent amount of fun with it. Armored Agility and Steel Fiber, I would recommend replacing the second you start getting a hold of things like Augur Reach or Augur Message, or anything that's not the default mods. This is sort of like a generalized build that works quite well across the board. Corrosive Projection and Energy Siphon I found are probably the two most relevant aura mods you could go for. Especially some of the more easy ones to get a hold of. Deadeye would also be a good one as well, as that's extra rifle damage, and for using against the enemies trapped in the cyclones, that can be also quite beneficial. But I hope this guide has been somewhat beneficial to those of you who have watched this. I've probably missed one or two things here, but I hope this is a little bit more professional to what my previous videos have been. If you have learnt something, or you think I've missed something in general, please leave a comment in the description of the video down below, and I will probably, hopefully, maybe read them. And if you do like the content, leave a like, share it to your friends, tell your family, tell that pet goldfish you got, and hopefully I will see all of you top hatters in the next video. Ta-ra!